Man, you know, I like to wake up and then be in a good mood, you know? And today I was, and then we hop on Twitter to sort of the beginning of the show, preparation. And what's trending just makes me so sad. Makes me so sad. We'll get to that in a moment. Thanks so much for joining us here on a Wednesday, the JMULL Show. Whether you're watching at twitch.tv/the JMULL Show or on 110sportsmedia.com, at 110sportsmedia.com/live. Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday, making us part of your day wherever you may be listening. Very much appreciated. And I'm only going to spend a couple seconds on this because it's just, I had to get it off my chest, but stop getting tested is trending. Why is stop getting tested trending? Ohio is telling people to stop getting tested so that the testing numbers go down. This isn't the solution. How about you wear your mask, and even if people get tested more, the cases will go down. It's just not that hard. It really isn't. It's not hard at all. But okay, I'm done with that. But I had to get that off my chest. Just if we wear our masks, it doesn't matter. The positive test will go down by itself, and it's certainly not the right thing to tell your. Certainly not the right thing to tell your country and your state's your state and your state residents to not go get tested if they're sick. Are you joking me? It's no wonder that the United States is made up of 4% of the population of this world and 25% of the world's coronavirus cases. It just doesn't. It just doesn't make sense. Oh, it's so frustrating. But like I said, thank you for joining us today on a Wednesday. Real quick, let me set the agenda. We're going to talk to Chris Brown, not the Platinum Recording Artist, but 110 Sports' Chris Brown. He's our baseball expert, so we're going to talk to him about baseball. We're going to open up the show with baseball today on my own, but then we'll talk to him in about 20 minutes about really the worst mistake that baseball could have made at 11:20 or so, and then we're going to talk Patrick Mahomes. The dude raked in the money. But when you compare it to the contracts that were just signed by other big quarterbacks, like other young quarterbacks in the NFL, it's actually not that much different. I mean, it's like $30 million different, but the numbers of 10 years with at least $503 million is, or at the most $503 million is a little misleading in terms of just how long this actual contract might go before they retool it, what he'll make over the first 4 years, so on and so forth. So we'll get to that after Chris Brown, then we'll get out of here with FYI. But Major League Baseball, man, they just can't do anything right. They really can't. You know, and I've talked about this with the NBA, and of course there's a realization and a coming to terms with the fact that coronavirus cases are going to happen the second clubs start getting together, start participating in summer camp, and the season actually gets underway. That's not the issue here. But if you want this kind of thing to work, there's one thing that is at the foundation of this all, and that's information. Correct information, swift information, up-to-date information, accurate information. That's where the foundation of everything is. You have to know who has coronavirus, who doesn't, and then you keep testing them until you don't, and you get that information, then they go back to their team. It's all about information. You get a guy tested, you find out as quickly as possible. You isolate him so he doesn't spread it. You test him again, and you get the information you need before he can go back. What you can't have is teams waiting days for tests. And you really can't have it, days after the tests were made, that the tests haven't even made it to the Utah facility where Major League Baseball is doing all of their test results. Like, you just can't let that happen. Tester's not even showing up. And I get that it's the 4th of July, I do. But that's a mistake that just can't be made by Major League Baseball and Rob Manfred, who the players already don't trust. I'm not sure there's a relationship in sports that has less trust than the trust between Rob Manfred and the people who run Major League Baseball and the players. This really doesn't help. Oh man, it doesn't help. And there's so many more mistakes to make that aren't nearly as big of a deal. So many mistakes. And they made the worst mistake that you could possibly make. Because this shows a lack of attention to detail. And a lack of attention to detail nowadays gets people killed. It does. It's not like you can forget when the 4th of July is. It's in the date. And especially when it's on a weekend. Nobody's working. And, I have my reservations about us, people refusing to do anything if it's necessary just because it's the 4th of July, and that's a different conversation. But baseball should have known that. I know that. I know that the service, just in general, whatever service you might be talking about, is just not going to be as good on the 4th of July weekend because, a lot of services are taking a couple days off, and the ones that aren't, the people who are working, are mad that they're working, which is fine. But it's just the reality of the situation, and it's a reality that I have no idea how baseball didn't realize. Like, how do you not pick up on that? It's a holiday weekend. Do something to make sure that this doesn't happen. And, they release a statement, and that's all fine and dandy, good for them. Thank you for releasing a statement, so on and so forth. But they didn't, but it doesn't matter at this point. They spent all of their time talking about how, to be honest with you, and I apologize to Major League Baseball for making this assumption, but, the thing that the current administration running this country does that just boils my blood more than anything else is things are, going into the dumpster and things are on fire, and they're talking about how great things are. Major League Baseball failed massively this weekend, and in their statement, not only did they not apologize to the players for making this mistake, but they used and let me find it here. They were saying things instead like a level of analysis and turnaround time that is unprecedented in COVID testing. Unprecedented. If somebody went late last week to get tested at a CVS pharmacy or at a hospital and they hung their nose out the window and let somebody stick a swab up their nose, those people got their tests faster than Major League Baseball players did. What's unprecedented? Lack of attention to detail, and just it shows that Major League Baseball just doesn't get it. They just don't get it. Rob Manfred doesn't get it, and what the result is a mistake that really any league can't make, but especially a league that has no trust from its players. After this season is over, if it actually happens, and we'll talk to Chris Brown about that in a little while, maybe it'll happen, and hopefully this is really just a result of the 4th of July, and things can, at least from a testing perspective, go on without a hitch, but it might have already done the damage. Because there are players saying things that should absolutely terrify Major League Baseball. And of course, this was never going to be easy, and I recognize that for sure. This was never going to be easy. But this is a mistake that's so avoidable. At the very least, you can show your players that you're going to pay attention to the details, and show your players, and at the very least, give your players a sense of safety and security to the extent that you can. Because right now, Major League Baseball is not doing that. And as a result, you got players like Mike Trout's not sure he's going to play, and he wasn't sure he was going to play all along due to his wife being pregnant and his son being due in August. I mean, that's just something that's, out of Major League Baseball's hands. But what is in Major League Baseball's hands is making sure that Mike Trout feels as safe as possible playing baseball, so that when his son is born, he doesn't feel like he's in danger of getting his wife sick, getting his baby sick, getting him sick. And that's not what they did. That's a good point. They shouldn't be struggling with it, and it's gonna happen no matter what. And that's of course the thing that we have to come to terms with. And I've beat that horse to death on this show for sure. But you can't be struggling with testing. You struggle with it. There's so many other things that it's just more reasonable to struggle with, like everybody, but turning the tests around can't be one of those. Even if it's tough, it can't be one of the mistakes that you're making, because then you're going to lose trust. And that's the biggest result of this, is now your players don't trust you even more to an extent that they didn't before. I mean, Buster Posey is talking about he's not sure if he's going to play. Mike Trout, like I said, and then Chris Bryant is saying things that should terrify Rob Manfred. Chris Bryant said, and this is a quote, "I wanted to play this year because I felt that it would be safe and I would be comfortable. Honestly, I don't really feel that way." And that's really scary. It should be really scary for Rob Manfred. If players, because most players are going to be iffy. Maybe not on the fence, but everybody has their reservations about it because it's just the reality of the situation. But what this kind of mistake does is it turns people who, like Chris Bryant, who in this quote clearly is stating that, he thought it was going to be safe. Baseball's a contactless sport. It's not, you're not sweating all over each other. You're outside. You can, try to distance yourselves a little bit in the dugout. It's not super difficult to do from an eye test perspective. I mean, football fails every eye test, and believe me, I'd like to see football too. That would be great. But football fails every eye test, and it's impossible for, even in the middle of a game, to get transmitted. I mean, if one offensive lineman has it, he's breathing right in the face of a defensive lineman the entire game. So there's just some optics there that are really hurting football that aren't hurting baseball, and players like Chris Bryant recognize that, and then you make a mistake like this, and Chris Bryant is going from, "I felt like it would be safe," to, "I don't really feel that way anymore." And that's where you should really be scared if you're baseball, and that's on top of substantial players opting out of playing baseball. I know Nick Markakis has opted out. Ian Desmond, David Price, Ryan Zimmerman, Wellington Castillo, all opting out. And yeah, Zach, I think there is a talk about a new helmet, but everything I saw on Twitter from actual Major League Baseball players NFL players was, yeah, I'm not wearing that. So I mean, we'll see. But either way, it's tough to, there's a level of sweating on each other that just makes it a lot more difficult to deal with. But anyway, so Nick Markakis, Ian Desmond, David Price, Ryan Zimmerman, and Wellington Castillo from the Nationals, and the list is going to grow as a result of this. I'm pretty confident in that. And we're also seeing something in baseball that we haven't really seen in the NBA, because according to, and unless I've completely missed something, there hasn't been a player get significantly sick as a result of getting COVID-19. And I don't know if that's completely true. So don't quote me on that, but for the most part, this player has tested positive. There's been quite a bit of no symptoms, and that's the most. I think that's the majority of players, just as professional athletes in general, because they're in such great shape that their bodies can fight this. But then you get a guy like Freddie Freeman of the Braves, who's in phenomenal physical condition, of course, and is, won the gene pool, so to speak, because he's a professional athlete. He's just a higher level human from a physical perspective than most of us. And he's gotten hit really hard by it. And you've seen his wife come out and talk about how he's feeling, and you've seen him talk about it and say, this has really, knocked me on my butt. And people need to take this seriously. And as a result, it's getting players like Nick Markakis, who is also a Brave, saying, I thought I was going to play, but seeing Freddie like this and seeing his family having to go through this, it makes me not want to play. And now Nick Markakis is opting out. I mean, he opted out and said, he was citing family reasons, of course, like everybody is. But he also cited, I was talking to Freddie and hearing how he sounded on the phone scared me. And that's a dangerous, and that's, I don't want to sound insincere, not empathetic, because of course those are all good reasons to not play, and I'm never going to fault anybody for not wanting to play. But that's the kind of thing that can really get some momentum. And I think the thing that's being overlooked is just how teammates and other players getting sick can affect players who aren't sick yet. Because getting sick, and then like Spencer Dinwiddie of the Nets in the NBA, getting sick, and as a result backing out, DeAndre Jordan getting sick, backing out. I think that's where a lot of the concern is, at least from a public perspective. If somebody gets sick and then they're out, they decide it's not worth it. They feel bad, decide it's not worth it, so on and so forth. But the players who aren't even sick yet, who are just worried after watching another friend, another teammate get sick, and that's another piece of this puzzle that can keep people from playing. So it was really, of all of the mistakes that baseball could have made at the beginning of their sort of the start of their season and summer camp, I think this was probably the worst one that they could possibly make, because the issue was not COVID-19 cases. That was going to happen regardless. That's not the issue here. The issue is players not feeling safe and not knowing absolutely for sure that if they get tested, they're going to get their results back in a swift manner that keeps everybody around their team safe. I mean, there were players talking about how they got tested on Friday and got tested again on Sunday, sort of the every other day protocol, without knowing what they got, without knowing what they tested on Friday. Like, that can't happen. So they were just walking around. Then you force teams to close their facilities, and if one player thought they were negative and they were actually positive, then that's scary, and that's completely defeats the point of testing every day, because testing every other day, because then it's really like you didn't test for 4 days, and that's when you can really lose track of things. But we're going to talk to Chris Brown a little bit more about this after the break, but he's coming up next here on the JMULL Show. You're watching on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, back on the JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday. It's nice outside. It's nice and sunny. The sun's shining through the windows. But it's not exactly sunny days for baseball after what happened this weekend. And to talk with me about it is the one and only Chris Brown from 110 Sports. Covers Major League Baseball for us and is certainly our resident baseball expert. But he's here to talk about it with me. Chris, how you doing?
Doing well, Josh. Thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you. Obviously, wish we had better news in baseball to talk about, but good to be with you here on this Wednesday.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. You know, this is the third time you've been on the show, and every time I've asked you, every time you've come on, we've had something different happen that makes the following question interesting every time you come on the show. So, the first time we came on, it looked like, we were still struggling for a baseball season, and then you came on again because Manfred was like, okay, listen, we're playing 60 games. And now, we had a summer camp, things were starting to happen, and now we're 15 days away from the first pitch between the Yankees and the Nationals, and the question, I think, is still an interesting one. Is it going to happen? We're 2 weeks away, things are in full motion, but then something like what happens over the weekend happens, and the question is, I think, needs to be asked again. So on July 8th at 10:23 in the morning, are we going to play baseball or not?
That's a $1 million question, Josh, and I think it's continued question where the first pitch is thrown of that game. I think there's never going to be a point at which, a week from now, and things are still on track, that we're going to say, okay, now we're definitively having baseball. It's going to be a question all the way to the beginning of the season, all the way through the season, whether or not they're going to be able to get through the season or not. Obviously, you'd have to think the chances are certainly better now than they were when we didn't have a deal, when we didn't have an agreement, when we didn't have a plan for a schedule. But like you said, what's happened in the last few days is really troubling, and it's one of those things that if it continues, if it pops up again, if it continues to develop poorly in the next couple of days, we could see this unravel in a hurry. At the same time, if baseball is able to get this back on track, with the testing to some degree, we could see, this keep moving along, and then it may be other factors to be worried about more so than the testing. It's kind of hard to tell. It's really going to, in my mind, all rely on whether or not baseball is able to keep with their promise when they promised a smoother results moving forward with the testing. If they're not able to deliver on that, I don't think much else is going to matter. If they are able to deliver on that, then that's obviously a good thing. But then, of course, that leads to a whole other host of potential things that could pop up as well.
Do you think this was a result of the holiday weekend, or are you worried that this is a lack of attention to detail and this could happen again? Is it which is a bigger influencer for this mistake, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Baseball, basically the reporting from the New York Post was that the problems that happened over the weekend had to do with problems with FedEx and shipping over the holiday weekend, which caused the leak to go to a backup courier, and then there were problems with air travel of the samples getting to the lab. So I think that there's definitely something to be said for that this wouldn't have happened. There's been as big of a problem as it was over the weekend, if not for the holiday weekend. Of course, that's not really a good excuse. The holiday weekend was, everybody knew it was coming.
Right.
But as far as moving forward, I think it's, I think there's a good chance that things will be smoother moving forward. But there are also a couple things that really concern me. One of which being that yesterday there were still teams canceling or pushing back their practices. The Cubs yesterday, that was Tuesday. So we're talking about a delay from the holiday weekend. The holiday was on a Saturday, and it's Tuesday, and teams are still waiting on test results. That's really concerning. Also, we have reports that the union in Major League Baseball are actively pursuing an additional medical lab site to increase the speed and efficiency of test processing and reporting. To see me, baseball is concerned that they have with the lab in Salt Lake City is not enough, even in a non-holiday situation. So there are a couple things there that are sort of concerning to me, that there could be problems beyond just what happened with the holiday weekend.
Yeah, that makes me feel like there's more to just it being the holiday weekend, because if it really was the holiday weekend, then there wouldn't be a need to a need necessarily to, at least this quickly, find a way to up the speed of testing, if that makes sense. But I think, either way, this is certainly a mistake that you can't make. Is this the biggest mistake that you could possibly make as Major League Baseball, especially when considering the lack of trust that's already existing between the two sides?
It's certainly up there in terms of big mistakes when it comes to, like you talked about a few minutes ago, player trust in a situation that's already doesn't have a lot of trust. This is really a pretty darn big mistake. Obviously I'm sure there were worse things that could have happened always, but Oakland Athletics relief pitcher Jake Diekman said the other day, he said, "We knew there would be hiccups, but we didn't know there'd be hiccups with the actual test results, because that's basically the number one priority. Everything is secondary." And I think that really sort of sums up a lot of the players' feelings, and a lot of what we've heard from players in recent days, that, none of this works. None of the rest of it, everything else is secondary. If the testing, to the testing, and the testing that was promised for there to be results within 24 to 48 hours. So when you have the number one thing that's sort of holding up the foundation of your season at this point in this situation falling apart at the very beginning, I think that it really is a major hurt for the league in the players' eyes.
Is the league ever going to be able to regain the trust of players with testing? Or is it sort of one of those things that even if it goes on without a hitch from here on out, that there's still a little bit of a doubt to whether or not a player getting tested is actually going to result in them getting the information they need quickly enough?
Yeah, I think there's definitely time for baseball to get this right. And there are also managers and players over the last couple of days, obviously plenty of them expressing frustration, and everybody, is generally not, who's been impacted is generally not pleased, of course, with what's happened. But there has been optimism expressed by, among others, I saw the Angels manager Joe Madden, and some players expressing optimism that this would get fixed, that this would get figured out in time. And I think that, there's a good chance that if baseball is able to get this figured out, there's not this sort of distrust for the whole season. But I think it's always going to probably be for this season in the back of everyone's mind when it comes to the players and personnel. And I think that there's also, a number of questions about how this system's going to work. One thing I found very concerning and interesting that came out yesterday was that Rangers outfielder Joey Gallo, it was reported by the Dallas Morning News, he hasn't been able to participate in team workouts yet, and he tested negative for the coronavirus at a private Dallas lab on Tuesday. It was his second negative test in the last 10 days. But he also tested positive twice in that same time span using MLB's sanctioned lab
Oh,
test.
no.
So there's real confusion there, and that was reported last night and this morning that Gallo basically tested negative twice from a private Dallas lab, and in that same time tested positive twice from MLB's lab results. So there's real confusion there, and if that becomes a problem, that could be really concerning.
How do you feel about that's absolutely terrifying. I think that's, a concern just in general here, but saying it's a private lab and private testing spot makes it sound like that it's a little bit more official and more trustworthy than just hanging his nose out of the side of the car window like most people have to do to get tested right now. How do you feel about the way that, because in my head it's a lot easier and a lot safer and a lot quicker to just have to outsource in each market come to a contract with a private testing place in each market to just send tests there rather than send everything to Utah. Is that the best way to do it? Is that just is me wishing that just unrealistic? Because I feel like flying tests across the country is certainly not a helpful thing for efficiency and accuracy, even if it doesn't necessarily hurt it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely an interesting a valid point, about valid thing that I would imagine has been considered or was considered by the league in recent weeks. It sort of potentially makes some problems easier, such as, like you said, with the travel involved and getting results faster, a less of a load on one lab and that sort of a situation. I think it could open. I think what the thing that the league has been paying attention to is in certain markets, there's a question about how does that look ethically in the markets where the cases are really surging right now and labs are are being overrun with tests and trying to keep up, and then all of a sudden people who are who are really showing symptoms, who are in real need of test results, are all of a sudden, if they're impacted by baseball's efforts, because there's obviously places in the country right now where it's really surging, and in Texas and Florida, and so teams in those markets using labs there could take away from test results quickly from people with actual with reported symptoms, regular citizens. So I think maybe that's part of the major reason that hasn't really been a thing we've heard about. But I think that there's certainly pros to it as well.
Yeah, that's certainly a good point, and something that every league in this country is having to balance, especially as cases rise, and we're every day getting a record-breaking daily cases in this country number. So that's certainly something to consider as well. One thing that hasn't really been an issue in, for example, the NBA is, this is really the first time that I've seen one player getting sick really affecting the thought process of another player. And I'm talking about, Freddie Freeman, has reportedly really struggled has really been battling COVID-19 and hasn't just tested positive for COVID-19. And you see players like Nick Markakis, who said, I really thought I was going to play, but then talking to Freddie on the phone, I was scared of how he sounded. Do you think that's the kind of thing that will sort of spread throughout baseball, or and something that the league should be concerned with, or is that just Markakis being smart and deciding that was the best decision for him? Do you think that's worrisome for Major League Baseball, that seems to have some impact?
I think it definitely could be. I mean,
Chris,
to see if any other players follow Markakis in taking it.
Sorry, everybody. There we go. Okay. Chris, you there?
Oh, Josh, you got me?
Yep. Okay, you're back.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. So I think that we definitely could see continue to be a problem if more players are, it's not a problem for players to take the same, but I think that it's something that we could see spread today.
All right, we're gonna hang up on Chris for a minute and call him back here in a second, see if we can get a better connection here in a moment. But yeah, I think he's right, and that's certainly something that's important for every league in this country to consider, is how this looks for testing in each country, in each city, especially as cases begin to surge. And that's certainly an outside point that is worrisome, absolutely. But let's try to get Chris back on the line here really quick. But it's certainly not an easy thing either way. But we're trying to get Chris back on the line here real quick. I believe we're getting him really quick. Chris, can you hear me? All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. There's some connection issues there. But yeah, as you were saying, Markakis is a thing that will continue to gain traction, or maybe not so much.
Yeah, I think it definitely could be something to watch for in the coming days, to see if players take a similar approach to Markakis. And, obviously, as you talked about, Josh, the majority of players that have been confirmed as testing positive, it's been reported that they are not experiencing symptoms. But obviously we have cases like Freddie Freeman where that's not the case. Mm-hmm. I was reading about Kingery last night, the Phillies infielder who was diagnosed with COVID-19, and he was talking about how he got chills so bad he couldn't move without his whole body shaking. His feet were spiked so high that I sweated through my sheets, he said.
Wow.
He was talking about, he said, quote, "For a week I was so tired, low energy, fatigue. Then I experienced the shortness of breath for a week. I felt like I laid on the couch for 3 weeks without moving. I was tired just going up the stairs." And that's a 26-year-old professional baseball player experiencing, significant symptoms. So even though the majority of these players are experiencing, from reports, no symptoms, the ones that are, they're definitely players who are dealing with significant symptoms, and that's going to make, I think, a lot of players consider the ramifications of playing this season. It's going to be something to watch moving forward for sure.
And the last thing before we get out of here is, how do you feel about the way that Major League Baseball responded to this in their statement? I think they've, and this is a quote, they said, "A level of analysis and turnaround time that is unprecedented in COVID testing, on the heels of a really bad look for them at taking, 3 days to get tests back, which is certainly not unprecedented, and then not, at least from what I've seen, really issuing a genuine apology to players, really just sort of trying to cover their own ass when it comes to this thing." How do you feel about that response to what happened over the weekend from the league?
Yeah, I don't think, obviously it's clear the league is trying to do damage control, trying to put out a statement. They think that the best approach is to just say, yeah, there were some unforeseen delays. That's the word they used, the phrase that they used. And they think that that's the best way to just clean it up and move on. But it's the kind of thing where they said, we've addressed this and we do not expect a recurrence. And when they use that kind of language, first of all, like you said, they're not apologizing. So there may be players who are upset that the league is not really taking the level of responsibility for this that they would like. And they're also promising that, basically saying this is not going to happen again. So they're putting themselves, in a situation where this does happen again. Look, they were very clear about the fact that they don't expect this to happen again. And then we also have the report. We had, a number of general managers and players speaking up that they were expressing frustration. So one of them was Washington Nationals general manager Mike Rizzo, who had really a scathing statement. He said Major League Baseball needs to work quickly to resolve the issues with the process in their lab, and this was before that statement came out. And it was reported that Rob Manfred, apparently, according to the Washington Post, jumped on him for that, was the expression that was used. So Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, apparently frustrated, expressing anger at the Nationals general manager for pointing out this problem, which seems like really not the way to handle this as well. So I think baseball definitely has their work to do if they want to, regain player trust.
Yeah, that's certainly a bold strategy there, to yell at a manager who's worried about his players in the league's safety. But Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat baseball with me.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one, brother. That's Chris Brown, 110 Sports. Great guy. If you don't follow him on Twitter, you should, at CBrownSports. He's really all over the baseball thing, and his show Around the Bases with Chris Brown airs here on the 110 Sports Network Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk some Patty Mahomes. 24 years old. I just turned 22. He's 24. And he just signed a 10-year contract. He's absolutely ridiculous. But we'll talk about that when we get back. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. 10 years could make up to $503 million. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And you know what? He deserves it. He's worth every penny. And the chances of them actually paying him $503 million are slim. Actually getting to the end of this contract, of course talking about Patrick Mahomes and his 10-year $503 million contract. That's just a ludicrous amount of money. This is JMULL Show. Thank you so much for joining us on a Wednesday. $503 million. And I want to tackle this from a couple different perspectives. First of all, he's worth it. I mean, he's only 24 years old. He already has an MVP and a Super Bowl in his first 3 seasons, his first 2 years as a starter. And in 10 years, he'll be 34. If my math is correct. But, and I don't think it's fair to compare anybody to Tom Brady, because Tom Brady's been doing it a lot longer than Patrick Mahomes has, but Tom Brady's 42. 42. And it hasn't been that long since he won a Super Bowl. Hasn't been that long at all. 2018. That's crazy. My point being is that most quarterbacks really reach their peak. I mean, right in the sweet spot there. I mean, if you're not getting hit. Early 30s, you're experienced. You've seen pretty much every defense that anybody could ever throw at you. You've got the experience, and certainly when you're starting, well, when you're as good as Patrick Mahomes, so there's no issue with how good he's going to be, but he's going to have seen everything by then. And every year he unless he gets injured, every year he's going to get better. So that's the first thing here is, I mean, he's signing this contract so early that he'll still be in a position when it's over to play 6 more seasons, especially with his arm strength. I mean, that's the crazy thing about Mahomes, is that right now he uses his legs incredibly well, and he's a really strong player who runs hard, but his arm strength is so ridiculous that as long as that hangs around, even if he loses some athleticism and stays in the pocket more, his arm strength is going to stay there, and he can easily turn into a pocket passer. And someone who depends on, who uses his legs just to extend plays when he has to, rather than when he wants to, if that makes sense. It's actually impressive though, because of course this is a ludicrous amount of money, and there's certainly a whoa factor to this. But when you compare his deal to some of the other guys sort of in his class, so to speak, it's not all that more ridiculous than other quarterbacks. And of course, it's not, it's don't get me wrong, it's a ridiculous amount of money, and he's, making 22 some million dollars higher, and he's the only one on this list with a $30 million average salary. But Mahomes 2020, his new contract, for his 4 years would be $155.8 over 4 years, after his existing salary $27,631,000, and so now his total salary, 6 years, $183 million, with an average salary of $30.5 million. Carson Wentz, in 4 years, $128 million, but 6 years, $154.8. Goff, 6 years, $161. So it's not all that much crazier than, so there's a $22 million difference there, and the cap percentage is not all that different. So from a team perspective, of course you lock Patrick Mahomes up for a long time, but it's not really that much crazier than these other contracts we've seen quarterbacks like Carson Wentz and Jared Goff sign in the last few seasons. I think it's a really interesting conversation there, especially when you look at the guaranteed money, which is, I believe, at $141 million for for Patrick Mahomes. It's a very interesting conversation about it. This is a ludicrous amount of money. It's the most lucrative contract ever, and nothing all that close to just the sheer numbers we've seen. But when you break it down from a year by year perspective, and when they could retool the deal, so on and so forth, it's it sheds a new light on it, and it sheds a light that I think shows that it's not a bad deal for the Chiefs, and especially with the value you're going to get out of them, and especially with when you compare it to what quarterbacks like Wentz and Goff are making and the kind of contracts they've signed. And Patrick Mahomes is just on a completely different level, and certainly on pace to be one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time after just 3 seasons, which is jumping way ahead of the game. And we could still be talking about Patrick Mahomes 15 years from now. That's how much time he still has on his career if he stays healthy. But the other thing I want to talk about is the other 10-year quarterback contracts, a couple that I found that are just interesting, and it points to there's of course some sort of risk here when you're talking about 10 years from now. And here's a couple examples. Brett Favre in 2001, 10 years, $100 million. First of all, that's the biggest difference here. Both of these quarterbacks here that I'm about to talk about, 10 years, $100 million, 10 years, $103 million. 10 years, $503. Can make up to $503. That's absolutely ludicrous. But Brett Favre, 10 years, $100 million in 2001, went to 5 playoffs over the next 7 years in Green Bay. But by 2008, he had ended a brief retirement and was playing for the Jets 7 years later. And that's a good amount of value there over that stretch of time. But then you get a guy like Drew Bledsoe, who in March of 2001, and you see where I'm going with this, 10 years, $103 million. He played 2 games before getting injured. Tom Brady ushered in the era of Tom, the GOAT. And he was traded with 9 years left on his contract and was released by Buffalo after the 2004 season. Like, that's the kind of thing that can happen. And I'm not sure that is going to happen. I mean, Patrick Mahomes has really not had any major issues yet. And when he has sort of had these scary moments, so to speak, he's been able to return from them. So I'm not really worried about that. But it is worth the conversation just when you sign somebody to a contract of this level, and that's why the guaranteed money is helpful and is different from 12 years that Mike Trout signs, where all of that money is guaranteed. Mahomes' money isn't all guaranteed, of course, and so that keeps the Chiefs safe to a certain extent. But it's certainly a conversation. What if he gets hurt? That's certainly a possibility, but it's a ludicrous contract, really ridiculous that he signed that, and the numbers are just absolutely baffling, and as a result, doing it now, that's all there is to talk about. So of course we had to talk about it, but coming up next, we'll get to the FYIs and wrap it up here on the JMULL Show on a Wednesday. You're watching on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us. Shouts to Chris Brown for coming on the show talking some baseball. If you've made our show a part of your day in any way at all, we very much appreciate it. Go over to 110sportsmedia.com to check out all the content that's over there. News stories Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and content, of course, coming on the multimedia side of things every single day, from the shows here on the 110 Sports Network to the podcast that you see on the screen there. You can find the podcast versions of this show as well as those podcasts and the podcast versions of Touchline Talk and Around the Bases with Chris Brown on just search 110 Sports on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and you should find those as well. But FYI, before we get out of here, FYI number one, there was a huge overhaul of the national lineup at ESPN. So first of all, Golic and Wingo out. And shouts to Mike Golic. 1998 was when he first joined ESPN and has been sort of the flagship radio host for a really long time. You know, it was Mike and Mike in the morning for a long time, then Golic and Wingo after that. So first of all, shouts to Mike Golic for that. That's an absolutely crazy, awesome career, and he's been a part of ESPN for a long time. But there's been quite a big shift. It's a new weekday schedule that'll kick off on Monday, August 17th. You've got Keyshawn Johnson, Jay Williams, and Zubin Mehenti. They'll replace, Ruben. Will lead off ESPN's morning audio schedule, Keyshawn, Jay, and Ruben. And then you've got, Keyshawn Johnson, of course, on NFL Live, and he's hosted a show in Los Angeles for ESPN. Dan Lambert and Stu Gatz, they're going to be around. The boys. And the Max Kellerman show at 2 p.m. You got some shows in the afternoon. Sarah Spain and Jason Fitz are back, and then Freddie Coleman and Ian Fitzsimmons as well. So just an interesting, switch to the lineup for ESPN's national schedule that is really, time to switch it. It had actually been the same for quite a while. And then, of course, the FYI per usual, every single day, right here on the 110 Sports Media Network. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring. Around the Bases with Chris Brown tomorrow, and then I'll be back on Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern for Touchline Talk, 1 p.m. Eastern for Around the Bases with Chris Brown. And then I'll be back on Friday at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern, to wrap up a week of shows. Thank you so much for joining us here on a Wednesday. Go to 110sportsmedia.com, check out all the content there. And, of course, I'll see you on Wednesday.